This video will serve as the backdrop for one of my latest writing projects, the Numerical Temple of Benorum. If that captivates any of you guys' attention, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and comment down your thoughts and opinions on wanting this book, and I'll be able to deliver and hopefully send it in due time. But without further ado, let's get started. The prophet Ezekiel is seen as a visionary prophet. His angelic and prophetic visions laid the basis for a lot of Old Testament spirituality and mysticism, with a lot of rabbis taking the Merkabic and angelic vision mysticism from the book of Ezekiel. Now, from the other three major prophets out of the four major prophets, we have somewhat of an idea on how Christians use their passages to talk about Jesus' presence in the Old Testament. For example, Isaiah, being the prophet of salvation, is used by Christians to identify and emphasize Jesus' coming of salvation in the New Testament. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, his lamentations and his lamenting in general basically gives Israel a new hope for a new covenant, which is fulfilled in Jesus in the New Testament, according to Christians. Then there's Daniel, who essentially has visions of the Son of Man on a throne. This serves as the basis for high Christology, and even serves as the basis for where Jesus is in the Old Testament. And yet, there isn't too much talk, in my opinion or in my view, about the Christology that's in the book of Ezekiel. Now, I'm not necessarily a Christian. However, I saw this scripture and I thought it would be good to relay past a lot of people who might believe in Christology and might believe in the presence of Christ in the Old Testament. Another reason why I am giving a certain passage in the book of Ezekiel is because, as you guys know from the YouTube channel, I practice Enochian. And basically, I've been trying to find biblical bases for the Enochian system for a while. And in this Ezekiel scripture, not only did I find a Christology passage, but I also found essentially a possible numerical basis for one of the angelic systems in Enochian. So if any of that grabs y'all attention, then be sure to hang tight for the video because I have something I want to share with y'all. So what passage in Ezekiel are we going to be focusing on that talks about Proto-Jesus and Proto-Enochian? This chapter is Ezekiel chapter 40. Now the thing about the number 40 already is that 40 already holds a huge significance in a lot of numerical traditions, with Moses being on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus fasting for 40 days, and 40 being the letter of Mem, which encompasses the element of water. So basically in chapter 40, we see a very specific passage that I would like to share with y'all in terms of understanding Proto-Enochian and Proto-Jesus. Here it is. So the context of Ezekiel 40 from a literalist, fundamentalist, and orthodox sense is it's simply just the dimensions of a new temple of Jerusalem envisioned by Ezekiel, given to by a mysterious man. However, to the spiritual seeker, this chapter is completely loaded with code and it's loaded with numerology that is not just trivial numbers and not just trivial dimensions that people should just gloss over. It is, however, a living translation of the mystical stars and of the mystical powers that be through the numbers, through the numerical constants in this chapter. But where does the high Christology come into place? Where does Ezekiel, in my opinion, see Jesus? Well, Ezekiel sees Jesus at the beginning of the chapter. Jesus is the possible figure that Ezekiel might be envisioning to basically see and experience the new temple of Jerusalem in Ezekiel chapter 40. But what are some data or what are some passages that suggest the following? Well, it has to do with the first few verses of Ezekiel chapter 40, which goes as follows. This is Ezekiel chapter 40 verses 1 to 3. In the 25th year of our exile, in the beginning of the year, and the 10th day of the month, and the 14th year after the city was struck down, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me there. In visions God brought me to the land of Israel, and set me down upon a very high mountain. On it towards the south was something like the construction of a city. He brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like bronze, and he had a linen cord in his hand and a measuring rod. He was standing in the gateway. So how does this suggest that this was possibly a proto-Jesus? Or even if you're a biblical skeptic, you could say that they took this model and made Jesus into it in the New Testament. Well, the data that suggests this, in my opinion, is that Jesus sits at the right hand of God. And it says in this passage that the hand of the Lord was on him and brought me there. If that's not good enough, the appearance of this man that Ezekiel basically sees is that his appearance was like bronze. Does that sound familiar to you? This should sound familiar to you because this is the appearance that Jesus takes on in the book of Revelation. He takes on a bronze appearance. Now, the biggest selling point I think for me in this is the symbolic selling point of where he stands. He stands in the gateway of the temple. In Christian theology and Christian doctrine, Jesus is seen as the gateway towards the presence of God. Jesus is seen as the gateway, or the person who stands at the gateway that leads towards the temple of God, or God's presence basically. Because in a Jewish sense, the temple of God is the manifestation and the culmination of God's presence on earth. And Jesus in the New Testament and in the Gospels essentially stands at that gateway and leads people towards that presence of God. So now we're going to get into how does this have anything to do with Enochian. Well, this specific chapter has 49 verses in total. And if you guys watch my Heptarchia video, you know there's 49 Benorim angels, or 49 angels of good, each with 7 letters in their names and starting with the letter B. Now, I aimed in a future project to basically reconcile every single verse in Ezekiel 40, all 49 verses, translating them into Hebrew gematria, and then comparing and contrasting them with the names of the 49 Benorim angels. This is why the video or the book is called what it is, because it attempts via numerology to reconcile and to reform the Enochian practice within a biblical sense. It basically builds up the Temple of Jerusalem not as a physical structure, but as an angelic structure of heptarchial elements. If any of this captivated you guys or really interested you guys, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And this was a really quick video. However, I felt like the information needed to come out because it's a very interesting discussion we can open up on the presence of Jesus in the Old Testament, and specifically the presence of Enochian in the Bible. Thank you guys so much for watching, and this was a really quickie video, and I hope that it was alright and it was compact enough for you guys to get a nice discussion and a nice conversation out of it. So yeah, let's start a conversation in the comments, guys. Let's go. Let's do it. Peace out.